Hey guys, it's Alexander Williamson here with The Secret History Living Inside Your Aquarium. Today we're going to be talking about 1-gallon fish tanks. And what fish can you keep in a 1-gallon fish tank? That's more of a fish bowl. There are very rarely actual tanks that are made in a 1-gallon shape. So we're thinking more like a fish bowl, or maybe even a tray or dish, like a terracotta pot or something like that. And if you're new to the hobby, you're probably saying, a Betta, you can put a Betta in a 1-gallon. And pump the brakes a little bit. But if you've been in the hobby a little while longer than new, you may say, oh, you know what? You can't keep a Betta in a 1-gallon because it needs a 5-gallon, and it needs a heater, and it needs filtration, and it needs moving water, and a catappa leaf, and a little hammock to sit on. And if you've been in the hobby 5 years, longer, who knows, if you've been in the hobby a long time, then you may go back to that thinking that, yeah, well, maybe while I'm breeding my Bettas and doing other things, they can go in a 1-gallon tank, or maybe even a 1-pint container for a few days or a week or whatnot. But there actually are species that can go in a 1-gallon tank, and we'll talk about some of those right now. I want to walk over and show you a few of the choices of what you could put in something where I'm saying it may not be a 1-gallon aquarium in the sense that the whole box, the glass box, is 1 gallon, but the box may be 3 gallons, and maybe you have some land in there and you've got kind of a terrarium thing going on, or a riparium. These are fish that would work for kind of that situation where, you know, you've got some substrate and things like that, that maybe you've got a wabikusa set up, or you've got, you know, a riparian setup where you've got plants, land, and a frog, or, you know, something like that living on the terrestrial part of your enclosure, and then you've also got some water that the animal requires also. In that case, then there are some other things you can put in the water if you're okay as far as your creature not eating them, or if you don't want them eaten. But let's take a look real quick at a couple choices of what I've put in 1-gallon containers for more than, say, a month. So look here. So as we're over here, we're at my ponds outside, and obviously shrimp are going to be my first advisement. Now, as soon as I say shrimp, they're a good choice. You can put shrimp in a 1-gallon container, and I would say that they can get along just fine. This is not a gallon. This is much less than a gallon. This is probably a 1/4 gallon right here. Maybe a 1/3 of a gallon. And the shrimp, actually, you can keep them there in a 1-gallon, but you're going to have much, much, much better luck if you have them at least in a 5, if not a 10-gallon, because it's really hard to keep the water at a consistent temperature and setting as far as your parameters go. Everything from ammonia to all sorts of other issues start to come up when you're dealing with a small volume of water. Your nitrates, your nitrites, even just dechlorination. You know, do you use 2 eyedroppers or do you use 3? Whatever it may be, you've got some issues that you've got to kind of overcome when you're caring for that small of a volume of water. Now, if we're actually talking about fish for in a very small aquarium, there are some species that are both robust and hardy enough that they're not going to die as these water conditions kind of swing, and they can tolerate a pretty wide array of temperatures. The first one I'm going to recommend is actually a North American native, and that is the killifish, the least killifish in particular. And there are actually a number of killifishes that you can keep. Some of them are very colorful, some of them are a little bit plain Jane, and others are kind of like this one, which in my opinion, you know, you can get some nice stripes and colors and activity from them. But what's the coolest thing about these fish is they're live bearers. So they have babies, and prolifically. So you do need to be careful that you don't have too many, but you can see here that they are a cool looking little fish, especially when they've been outside. They get some color to their fins. You can see that the males here have some color on their fins, and they get all sorts of spots and stripes depending on where they were collected. Along with them, kind of on the same train of thought, are white cloud or meteor minnows. So these are the albino or gold, 24 karat gold, whatever you want to call them, white cloud minnows. And both of these fish are able to be outside. They are completely compatible with the northwest of the United States, which is one of the cooler regions in the US as far as our low temperatures get to maybe 45 degrees at night most of the time, with the exception of the dead of winter. We can get freezing temperatures, but most of the year these guys can actually survive outside. So being inside your house in a bowl is absolutely no problem whatsoever for them. And likewise, there's another fish in here that's right here, and this is known as the Medaka or the rice fish. And it's a Japanese fish, as well as Taiwan and other Pacific, Southeast Asian nations, Central East Asian countries, I guess. Alright, so the other cool thing about this fish is it can be viewed from above. So this is the same exact species. This is just a peach or kind of salmon colored version with orange heads. And these fish are some juveniles that you see next to two adults right now. But just to give you an idea of how small of an area they're in, my hand, I've painted up my fingernails, and you can see it is incredibly small. These fish are only an inch full grown at max. And so you can put them into a shallow tray or dish. And in Japan, historically, they kept them in kind of these shallow terracotta planters with lilies or other things like that. But let's go look inside and look at one more color variation of these fish. They're kind of like little miniature koi, if you've never seen them before, and they don't need a heater, and they don't need oxygenation in the tank like normal filtration you'd have for neon tetras or something like that. They can withstand the kind of stagnant water a little bit more because they are related to the killifish group. So let's go take another look at some more options inside and kind of what a planted teeny tank would look like. Alright guys, you remember how I was saying that you could have a shallow tank? Well, in the aquascaping world, there are these shallow tanks. A company named Do Aqua, as well as ADA and Mr. Aqua, Aquatop, various UNS, various companies have made these over the years. But here is another option, and this is the blue or Miyuki rice fish. And these are really beautiful in that they just glow from above, especially outside in natural light. These ones are indoor, obviously, and they're being kept in a pretty small container. No active filtration. There is a sponge filter in there in theory, if I want to turn it on, and just to give it more area for biofiltration. Now, also in here with them, I do have shrimp. So I've got Caridina shrimp, I've got Malawa shrimp in here, as well as these blue cheetah Caridina. And so not all Caridina are, you know, crystals and King Kongs and the ones that you've heard of that are more delicate. You can get some of the wild species, or even just a Neocaridina shrimp, and they'll survive just fine in small tanks in small water. But you really do want to have a good substrate with soil or some sort of aqua soil for a small container like this, and you do want to have quite a bit of cover for your fish. So the fish that everybody's expecting to see when they think 1 gallon aquariums is usually the betta. And this is how I keep my bettas, just so you know, when I show you those other fish, This is how I keep my bettas. There are 2 bettas in this entire tank. Here it comes. It knows it's gonna get food in a moment. But there's the male, and there's also a female in here, and there's some shrimp that they do graze on. But I keep mine in a tank with aeration and a heater, but it doesn't need a heater in this room, but let's just say it has a heater. If this room wasn't heated completely on its own, it would have a heater so that it stays at least above 72 degrees or so. But that's just my preference. They can be held in small containers. Even a 2.5 gallon tank is better than nothing. For me, a 2.5 gallon tank is generally a shrimp or a fry tank, but as you move up in size, you can keep anything from neocaradinas like these red cherry shrimp here, or if you've got moving water in a fountain or something, there are another type of fish known as gobies that you can keep in small sections of water. And one of the gobies that you could do, if you do water changes frequently, is the freshwater bumblebee goby. And they look like a cute little bulldog of a fish. Again, they get about 3/4 of an inch long, and that's it. They stay very small, and you can keep them in a small body of water. Even that being the case, I like to keep my fish in more water. So this is all up to you and your choices of how you want to keep your fish or shrimp in the end. And in the end, I like to keep my fish in a very densely planted tank, like this one. Here you can see I have a whole lot of light going on. I have a hang off the back filter, and even in a tank that's a medium size to a small size tank, again, hand for size, you can keep many, many more fish and creatures like snails, invertebrates, or whatever you'd like to keep in a tank that has proper substrate with nutrients or root tabs, or you can just set it up right to begin with. And for that, I would really suggest that you guys also inform yourself about planted tanks, dirted tanks, and what we call the Wallstead method, or other methods that use soil and believe that your whole aquarium is your ecosystem, in that even in a bowl or something small, you can have species like little endler males or guppy males like this one here. You can have little tetras or chili rasboras, things like that. And we'll look at a couple more little danios and scarlet batis and things like that that may, in theory, work in a little bowl like this one here. But what I want to show you and what I want to encourage you to do is to inform yourself about having a deep substrate, or at least a soil of some sort, an aqua soil, so that you can then have plants, moss, greenery, and varied textures of rocks and things like that. Not just a plain gravel laid down in your aquarium. You want variation. You want moss, sawassertong. You want marimo moss balls or algae. You want snails or things like that, because they tell you when you've overfed, or when there are too many fish, or the nitrates are too high. They tell you when your tiny fish, which there are things like carplets, and that's just like carp, like goldfish, or carp, common carp. There are these little carplets, as well as amber barbs and other fish that you can keep in very small containers. But you need to do your research, because while we can keep many of the fish that I was just talking about in a container like this, many people will run a fountain, and it may need to be turning over the rate of water, of aeration in your tank many times an hour, 5, 10, 20 times an hour, for your fish to be okay. Oftentimes when you see someone showing off a tank or a little container that has a bunch of fish in it that's hanging off the side of an aquarium, or that's within an aquarium, it's a breeder setup. And when it shares the water with a tank that's much bigger, so if we were to clip an aquarium onto here, all the rules change, because it has all this filtration, all this oxygenation, and you can keep a whole lot of fish that you wouldn't normally be able to keep in a small space, because you're sharing the water back and forth if you've got lines running that way. However, let's look at the last few choices you have, just in case you're still wondering, some other ideas for fish that can kind of be kept at room temperature and in a bowl of this size if you absolutely want to. Now, the ethics of it, you could keep them in a cup even smaller than that, obviously, like you find Bettas and things like that at PetSmart in. But the ethics of how much space you want to give your fish, for how long, whether it's just for it growing out or if it's to split up a fish for aggression reasons, that's all going to depend on your personal opinion in the end. So let me show you a couple more fish that I think are manageable in the right circumstances. So, in the right circumstances, I think that obviously we've got endlers. They're just like guppies, but a bit smaller. And here we have an adult killifish, an adult rice fish, and an adult male endler. They're all hanging out, and for size, we also have one of the next fish I was going to recommend, which is a Celestio Pearl Danio. And right below it here, we have a Scarlet Bettas female, or Dario, and I hopefully will show you a male, which is a beautiful crimson fish. And you can keep a pair of them, a male and a female, in a very small space. In about 1 gallon of water to 2 gallons of water if you really want to, and I do that while I'm breeding them for about a month or two on end. Now, this Celestio Pearl Danio is one choice, but you can also put things like the Tin Winnie Danio or the Gold Ring Danio in, and that's another viable choice. Now, other than that, we have a very similar fish that'll be in this same aquarium, known as the Emerald Dwarf Rasbora, or the Erythromicron, and it is almost identical to the Celestio Pearl Danio, only it has, let's let it calm down, it still has the orange pattern on it, but it's got a dot on its tail and stripes on its side. Let's see if we can scare it over for you guys one more time. So there is the Emerald Dwarf Rasbora, and they color up very beautifully also in a large tank. If you keep them in a small tank like this, they will reproduce, they will survive, but they are not going to flourish the way you may want them to. And the same is true with most of these fish I'm talking about, other than the rice fish and the least killifish. And this guy right here, the Scarlet Bettas. So you can keep a male and female Scarlet Bettas in a 1 gallon volume of water. Now you need to keep that water nice and clean for them, and there are other species, you know, that you can do in a 1 gallon, such as clown or rocket killifish, if in that case you're having a big surface area like this and you are not running out of room as far, you know, instead of volume, you've put the area into a surface like a tray. That's where you could raise killifish, something like a little bit bigger than a shoebox, or this size, a baking tray size, volume maybe 2 to 4 inches deep, and full of plants with 1 inch or 2 of substrate underneath all of that. So in the end, you've got some choices, and I highly suggest you look into which fish are able to breathe air. For instance, labyrinth fish like bettas, like, for instance, a sparkling gourami is another good choice for a fish, or a licorice gourami, chocolate gourami, things like that can live in a small space, and even if the water conditions get a little bit dicier, they have the ability to breathe, you know, that air from the surface. They have options survival-wise that they've evolved with. And in here, I've also got a sparkling gourami right ready to look at you from the glass. And this is another very small fish, only about 1 inch long, that's pretty colorful and interesting. But like with all of the other little fish, this one is a little territorial too. So really you don't want to go mixing these species unless you have more room or a pretty good knowledge of how everyone interacts in your aquarium. So I hope you guys learned something. I hope you guys have an opinion on this and you inform yourselves. And if you're looking for any of these fish, my friends over at Aquatic Arts, I have a link below with a discount. You can always visit them. They carry really good sources for these fish that are really top grade, healthy, sustainably sourced, and also bought from local breeders in the US. And I just highly recommend their plants and fish. But a lot of my fish, in fact every fish you've seen today except for the wild ones, have been sourced through them. And there's a lot you can learn on their website also to research before you buy any species of snail or fish or plant. So whether you're going big or you're going little, just remember to inform yourself. And I will talk to you next time on The Secret History Living Inside Your Aquarium. Take care, guys, and if you like this episode, remember to hit that like button. And if you want to learn more about snails, invertebrates, plants, fish, and the history of the hobby, please hit that subscribe button and you'll be alerted next time I've got a video out of interest to you. Thanks again, take care, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.